I'd like you to begin by asking you all to think about your day today. Probably an average day. Perhaps this morning was an early one. You dragged yourself out of bed, got a cup of coffee, walked to the train, headed into school or to work. You probably thought about a lot of different things today. But was any of those things survival? Were you ever concerned about chasing down your next meal or evading some large predator that was following you? The answer, unanimously, is no. Humans are very different to any other species in this regard. The majority of us live taking survival for granted. This assumption of survival, of the perpetual provision of resources, is something that has been developing over the course of human history and has only become ubiquitously established in the last couple centuries or so, at least in the Western world. We have the luxuries of throwing out food, of leaving the tap running, of falling ill without concern for our lives. Even the simple appreciation of access to food seems to be decreasing. The other day, I found myself contemplating whether to heat up a pre-cooked Trader Joe's meal from my overflowing freezer, or to order in sushi, both of which requiring less than 5 minutes of effort on my part to yield an abundance of nutrient-rich food. But food was not always such a given, and the lengths that our ancestors went to in pursuit of their sustenance were astronomical in comparison to those which we now find ourselves pursuing. The process of getting from the former to the latter is one that encompasses much more about humanity than just our eating habits, but also details the causes and the catalysts of our successes overall. Millions of years ago, we were simple gatherers, eating fruits and nuts, scavenging for morsels of meat, and using sticks to fish for insects. But when faced with the evolutionary pressures of too many predators and insufficient food, early hominins were forced to change their behavior. They evolved on the rudimentary foundations of communication and creativity, working their way to a place where tools were the primary vehicle by which to obtain food. Vitally, these animals began to imagine. I've always been interested in the topic of our ancient ancestors. I first became engaged with it when I was only about 8 years old. I was at the library reading a National Geographic article about the discovery of Homo naledi, a new hominin species in the Rising Star Cave system in South Africa. The cave in which the 15 individuals of the species was found in is extremely inaccessible, requiring one to crawl through a 10-inch tall passage, scale a 50-foot climb, and drop down a 40-foot chute. This meant that the entire team of researchers that excavated the cave was composed exclusively of petite women, which was a big feminist moment for me as a child. But more importantly, I remember looking at the images of these little pieces of bones, of the skeletons of our ancestors, and thinking that I was somehow related to them. That if you traced back my lineage far enough, and theirs too, there would be some individual, more animal than human, but an individual nonetheless, from which we were both derived. I realized, in a simpler form than I now communicate it to you, that in all of these ancient species, there was some key ingredient that allowed them to evolve into us, and that ingredient was imagination. This realization was the first thing that coaxed me out of the children's fiction section and left me lugging home huge, previously untouched, because who cares about ancient ancestors, books about these crazy, crazy species. So what did imagination look like in early human history? Well, as I've already alluded to, tools were the first manifestation of the imaginative spark. Simple objects that graduated their purpose of rock or stick or stone and became grinder and cutter and musher. Australopithecus afarensis, one of the earliest bipedal hominids, meaning they walked on 2 feet, created Aldoan tools, rocks that were simplistically chiseled to form sharp edges, and used them to cut meat around 2.6 million years ago. Where previously their lives were driven by the eat or be eaten mindset, these early hominins were now enjoying far more plentiful access to more nutritious food, importantly allowing the necessary energy surplus for brain growth to evolve. But the path to the creation of tools was not a one-step process, nor was it the work of a single genius, Einstein-like individual. Rather, it necessitated communication and collaboration to a degree that had never been required before. These early hominins were learning from one another how to create effective tools and communicating in the moment of the hunt. Much like young children, they were learning how to delegate tasks within a group rather than having everyone act the same as a herd. This communication and collaboration has become inalienable to the success of humanity overall. And while it took the form of simple grunts and interpretation of body language at the time, it set the stage for a future of complex speech and literacy. What has long fascinated me about the ways that paleoanthropologists find this information is that it's literally through looking at the skeletal remains of these early hominins. These fossils reveal the truth of how they ate, how they lived, really who they were. I remember being on a holiday in Paris with my family and going to see the Parisian catacombs. The labyrinthine walls are hedged with bones, femurs on tibias, on humeruses, on skulls. It was unimaginable for me to reconcile the image of these bones with real and alive human people. It occurred to me that paleoanthropologists deal with that contradiction as a part of the job. It's not merely the study of any old extinct species, but the study of our ancestor extinct species, a series of parent-child relationships that lead to us. Everything that you and I are rests on these species, and the mere fact that I can conceive this idea and communicate it to you rests entirely on their revolutionary change in behavior, imagination. The next leap in the trail of human creativity occurred sometime later, when the Neanderthals and some other members of the Homo genus learned how to control fire. This was a process that required not only exceptional pattern recognition, but also an important element of creativity. Having power over fire revolutionized the capabilities of the species, potentially even having an effect on their evolution. Suddenly, they were able to harness so much more nutrition from the food that they were eating, and fire afforded them the time at night, the energy, and the capacity to think about things that weren't just food and predator and prey. This revealed another important facet of human imagination, which is human curiosity. These early hominins were beginning to look at the world around them, to question it, to think deeply about it. This started the earliest forms of art and music, which we can see in early cave drawings. This precipitated the next and perhaps most powerful ever manifestation of human creativity, the emergence of language. This solidified our capabilities of collaboration, of working together as individual facets of a larger construction, able to do anything that we put our minds to. Moreover, it allowed for the creation of thought and its expression. We weren't just really special animals anymore, we were something entirely different. We broke off the charts of nature's history, pioneering a world of which we were the masters. It feels a bit inadequate here to go on to describe the agricultural and industrial revolutions as the next life-changing leaps that humans made. There is so much more to be added to each of these points, yet my speech feels lengthy enough as is. Nonetheless, these revolutionary time periods mark, in my mind at least, the beginning of an extreme growth of human achievement, an exponential trajectory that we are currently in the middle of. I began by describing how we created simple tools, how we figured out how to use fire, but the agricultural revolution and its subsequent events are of a magnitude not even on the same scale of those earlier achievements. I don't need to tell you what we've created, what we've done, but we are the prodigies of this world which we inhabit. We've created technology that is so fluidly integrated into our lives, so fundamental to the way that we live. We've achieved what it seems every species strives for. Most of us never have to worry about survival. There is so much to be said about each of these achievements, and I feel guilty in brushing over them as I have. The universe is generous to each of us here. The mere statistical probability of our existence is almost nil. The fact that our ancestors had to overcome hurdle after hurdle and were successful at it is almost a miracle. Even the fact that your parents and your grandparents and so on had viable children was a minute chance. Each of the individuals of hominins past was one step along a long path that has led to you and I, part of a species that has all the doors open. They gifted us with creativity, with communication, with intelligence, and with empathy. But we are not the end of that path. There will be generations upon generations of humans to follow us, living in the world that we leave them with the minds and the bodies that we create. With the path that we're currently following, they will live in a desolate world, killed by rising global temperatures and our failure to address our responsibilities to the climate. We've lived in an unequal world for thousands and thousands of years, and at the rate we're currently going, it will continue to be so for generations to come. We are a species unlike any other, and my research in our history has convinced me that we are capable of turning the world around with just a little bit of collaboration. We are incredible, we are more than special, we have achieved more than any other species ever. Yet we have evolved beyond the point where we can forgive ourselves for failing to leave the world a better place. The imaginative trait makes us powerful. Let's use it for good. Thank you.